Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pinkham Preview Show ahead of Norwich City's latest Championship fixture. This weekend, it's a trip slightly up north, not all the way there, but to Staffordshire to face Stoke City in their most recent away game. And based on the form so far on the road, Norwich City might be feeling quite confident. Nonetheless, the feeling at the moment is relatively negative after some bad news in the week from Liam Manning. Obviously, a loss at Wrexham or against Wrexham at Carrow Road last weekend, and a point against Coventry that probably wasn't quite justified. So, not the most happy of vibes going into this Stoke game, but I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Paddy Davitt to discuss it, and maybe we can even find some reasons to feel optimistic. But I suppose one of them is the fact that they're on the road again. So maybe we'll start with that. But Paddy, first of all, thanks for joining me. How are you feeling about things in the world of Norwich City at the moment? Because it doesn't feel like the happiest place.
No, it's very early, as we discussed on the post-Wrexham podcast last Saturday night, and probably influenced by what we'd just seen unfold at Carrow, but it feels very early in the season to be at this point. That said, me and you were on the Spaces midweek on the Pinkham X channel, and I think, I forget his name now, was it Alex who came on? And he was he was very measured, I thought, in terms of, didn't single out any individual or constituency, but more or less said, look, we just, as a collective, anybody associated with Norwich, we're too quick to almost go to the nuclear button and maybe just accept that it's a new head coach, a lot of new players, and that this is a process and it will take time. If you lean into where Manning has took all the other previous clubs, it was from pretty incremental steps in the initial phases. So it's actually maybe going to type. It just feels that because you then wrap round the expectation levels that were accompanying this club going into the season, that they are falling short. But Liam Manning's the first probably to acknowledge that. And again, post Wrexham, he was very candid in his messaging, public messages. And again, we were down at Colney on Wednesday, and he's not trying to downplay that this isn't good enough. There's been a lot of talk. It's now time for delivery. So, all the messaging is probably good and what you want to hear from your head coach, but it needs to translate now in his own way he's packaging it. It really needs to translate to something that can actually give you the belief that, this is now going to track along where we thought it was. Maybe the season was going to be benchmarked in terms of competing for a top 6 place. That isn't the case at the minute. There's far too much work in progress, far too many areas that feel like that there's no real coherent process to it. I'm talking, primarily for me, it's in possession. I don't want to keep labouring the point every time I do one of these. But that is the glaring issue for me, that they have to develop something that gives them that control of the ball, of territory. Because if they do, then the other bigger issue in play for me is you're not going to then require Vladan Kovacevic to don his Superman cape every weekend and pull off 3 or 4 top saves, because, as Liam admitted, they are giving up too many clear-cut chances. But for me, that all stems from not having that control. And if you don't have that control, then structurally you can see why they look so vulnerable. So it's a head coach and a coaching staff and a group of players who really have to come to some common ground and some common understanding of what they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve. And then hopefully that will translate into more consistent performances and off the back of that results. But there's no doubt there is that undeniable frustration and kind of almost waiting for the season to start. It doesn't feel like we've got going, really. There's been islands of positivity you can get behind. We can all think of the not even 45s in some cases, but the pockets of League Cup tie at Watford. That was good first half. Blackburn first half. And then you're struggling, really, to be honest, to sort of back that up. And I think this stage of the season, it is justifiable to feel that Portsmouth first half as well. I knew there was 1 or 2 other little slivers, but that you'd see a bigger body of evidence building up that, while still not anywhere near perfect, you can now start to see almost Liam Manning's imprint on this team. I think we're still very much suck it and see. And and it isn't going to get any easier tomorrow against the Stoke team under a very grizzled kind of knows the Championship inside out, upside down Mark Robins, who's got seemingly from afar looking at their start to the season, got Stoke going. So if anyone thinks this gets any easier from here, and we don't even really need to dig into what the upcoming week holds, ending with a trip to Ipswich, but that's the Championship. If you're looking for some easier runs and some less taxing periods, that doesn't exist really, because it's such a competitive league, such an even league, and that's why Norwich needs to start taking a step forward. And as Liam Manning said on Wednesday, they need to start delivering.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, it probably isn't going to get any easier. I think I struggle to remember too many periods, just like you, where really they've had where you can think Norwich are in possession for 5 minutes pushing for a goal, even when they've kind of scored and when they've been in those positions. It's mainly come as a result or in a part of a game where it's been almost basketball-esque and there hasn't been that level of control really. So I kind of agree with that side of things. But I wanted to ask you about kind of maybe what the root cause of some of the disappointment and some of the bad atmosphere and the frustration has been, because as you said, it's still very early in the season. You also referenced that spaces that we had where maybe there was some patience from some fans who we spoke to who were saying it is very early, and I have seen some fans who are still in that camp. But obviously when we've been in Carrow Road, you can't deny the hostile atmosphere there is there and the frustration from the supporters. So in terms of where that's coming from, I mean, I've kind of said a few times that I feel like it's from the communication going into the season, which I understood why they went into it, because obviously last season I think there were a lot of kind of transition accusations and that maybe the club didn't quite agree with, and they did feel that they were trying to push for the playoffs kind of throughout the season. And then this season, having got rid of Johannes Torup, gone for a head coach with championship experience who obviously got into the playoffs last season, it feels like there was a lot more gearing towards this is the season to achieve. It's all about ambition. There's no more transition. You can forget about the ideas of just endless time to kind of work on a team. And it feels like to me, because they went so hard on that in the summer, we've almost forgotten about, or some people have forgotten about the time that it takes every manager to kind of come into a new team and get things going, even if they're not a big project manager like a Torup or a Daniel Farker was at Norwich. So do you think that's kind of played into the feeling among the fan base as well? The fact that obviously last season there was almost this concession for the fact that it might take time, whereas this season it's almost no, the ambition is playoffs and promotion, and there shouldn't be any more talk of transition.
Yeah, well, on that final word was what we were told we wouldn't be hearing from internal types who were shaping this kind of project, for want of a better word, that you can forget about transition. So if you take that off the table, then it cannot be what it was this time last year, which was, as you rightly mapped out, Sam, under Torup, a very bold vision in terms of also the identity of the head coach. They'd entrusted to drive that forward, but also what they were trying to do, talking structurally and philosophy and playing style. That was a huge turn of the wheel from the Wagner era that had preceded it. But if that isn't the case this time around, and obviously you go and bring in a head coach who does know what the Championship is all about and successfully got a Bristol team into the top six, then it's reasonable to expect that they should be, even at this stage, as early as it is, probably measured by a different criteria. I mean, it's pertinent that it's Stoke this weekend, and you talked about project managers or philosophical driven managers. Mark Robins certainly isn't in that category of anybody's, I'm sure, observed his work at Coventry previously. He's a very pragmatic coach, very experienced coach. But even he, when he went into Stoke, I think it was around about the Christmas period this past year, he struggled. Liam Manning referenced it. They played his Bristol team in early February. Bristol won 2-0. And even 4, 5, 6 months later, I think they stay up by 2 points, Stoke. It was pretty nervy there towards the back end of the last Championship season. And you see what he's now managing, albeit still early, but the points they've got on the board, the defensive resolve, that is almost a hallmark of how Robins likes to organise his teams. Yeah. That is clearly there now. But it's even took him this period of time. Manning, when he went into Bristol, similarly, I think he went in the November of a season. Didn't pull up any trees in the rest of that championship season, and then it was last season, his first full season, where you started to see the work come to fruition. So you feel a little bit sorry for him in that regard, because he probably does. He clearly does need a body of time. But if you've messaged it out that it isn't going to be that, then this is the inherent tension or contradiction that we're facing at the moment. That, as you could see, the reaction of the home fans at Wrexham last weekend, having seen 3 previous league and cup defeats, that was the straw that broke the camels for quite a lot of them. And it isn't just clearly this season. We've talked about this. It's 3 or 4 years now of mediocre championship performances. You could argue Wagner getting them into the top 6 sort of was the slight outlier, but overall, even that was a season of pretty incremental sort of thin gruel in terms of entertainment, and they just managed to get the job done largely off the back of Josh Sargent's goals and coming back into the team. But it has been post Premier League era pretty hard, pretty tough, pretty lacking in any sort of excitement, if we're honest. And so Liam Manning inherits that. That's not something he's created or had any part to play, but that is that's the backdrop he comes into a football club and a fan base who almost feel it's been treading water for too long. And when you're told at the start of this period that we've gone and got a guy who did what he did at Bristol, we expect him to do the same here. We expect him to extract more from the available resource. But then you do go and embark on quite by Norwich standards in recent years, quite an ambitious rebuild in terms of transfer expenditure. Yes, they brought money in, as we know, for Sainz and Nunez, but it was still quite by Norwich's recent standards, quite an ambitious outlay. That raises expectation levels again, as it does when you pay reportedly 8.5 million for Antti Cernach. That's why he's now being judged by very different criteria to probably Jovan Makama to use that parallel. Likewise, Jurasek, you commit those funds rightly or wrongly, and it's not on the player because that's not something they can control, but it raises levels of expectancy. You pay 6, 7, 8 million for a championship grade player. You expect more than so far those players or more broadly that squad have delivered. So, if you're Liam Manning, I have some sympathy because he is trying to put the processes in place and almost fast track and short circuit it by picking up results while he does that. But he's struggling at the moment, clearly, to find that consistency in performance and with that results. And that's why maybe they go to Stoke tomorrow and they've picked up 7 points from 9 away from home. However, you might argue they've done it. They have done that, and that's indisputable. But the contrast is so marked with the Carrow Road anemia, effectively, that 0 points, pretty one-sided League Cup exit in the mix as well, and rightly questions being asked. So you feel a bit conflicted at the moment following this from a slight detached view, but I think when you boil it down, this was a club who geared everything up to we're going to attack the top 6. And of course, there's so many games left, so many months of football. That may still prove to be the case. We saw how Manning's Bristol last season really only started to pick up pace round the turn of the year into the new year. So that's fine. And you accept that and you understand that it might be a process. But they need to, I think, now start to provide more evidence in the here and now that we'll get to that point. And it will just take a little time and there'll be a few uncomfortable periods and we'll lose a few games along the way. So it's almost, can you see progression at this stage? Anybody who's turned up at Carrow Road this season hasn't seen too much for me in the way of progression.
No, I'd agree with that. And I think that's kind of been a lot of the problem is there hasn't been much sign of it getting better. And a lot of it, even the points they have picked up have been, as you referenced earlier, based on kind of Vladan Kovacevic and his incredible performances at times and some last-ditch defending and things like that. So that's probably where you need the performance to come in as well as the results. But I'm aware, as you kind of referenced, it's a lot to ask of Liam Manning probably at this stage. And there are times where definitely you kind of feel sorry for him. I think one of those was Wednesday's press conference when, to start off your conversation with him, you asked about Papa Amadou Diallo. So before we get into that, just in case anyone's missed it, I'm going to show people what Manning had to say about Diallo.
Papa Jallo. How are we looking?
Not good news. Bad injury to his quad, so he's going to be out for a good few months. So yeah, very disappointing ultimately.
Surgery route.
Yeah.
Has he had the surgery yet? Or?
No, close. So be soon.
And that is, well, it continues a theme. It was only this time last week you're telling us Matthias and Ben are out. Thankfully, not for that length of time, but off the back of a Mankell Thorson as well. I know you wouldn't hide behind those as excuses for, the broader kind of struggles we've had as a club this season on the pitch, but it doesn't help, does it, when you're losing key attacking players like that?
Of course it doesn't. We want as many available, to pick from as possible. And, you look at game-wide, I think large number of injuries, and the challenge is always, there's a huge amount of work that goes into finding out why. And it's always difficult to pinpoint one factor. I think there's loads of reasons behind it. I think there's injuries that are part of it in terms of you're going to pick up contact injuries. Matthias a freak landing, and then there's obviously other bits where we have to look in-house to make sure that we be better at the program we run and understand why. And like I said, there's bits going in behind the scenes where we have to be better.
And that was kind of the hammer blow that Manning delivered at that pre-match press conference that probably added to the bad feeling, because although I don't think Diallo has maybe been at his best in the last couple of games, probably has looked at times like one of their best summer signings, certainly in an attacking sense he has, and he's really given the team a lot of thrust. So, we'll get on to potential solutions, but Paddy, first of all, how big of a blow is that for Manning and for Norwich to have lost Diallo at this stage for so long as well, 3 to 4 months?
Yeah, well, off the back of Chris Gordon, isn't it? It feels almost cursed again. And, some of those comments I thought were very enlightening from Liam Manning when he was not seeking to shift blame in any direction, but basically saying, again, the processes that they're working to, because it feels that this is a continuation of a theme, really. And obviously in the last few days as well, you picked the story up yesterday, Gabe Forsyth, one of those who was injured last season and took a period of months before they went the surgical route. And it looks like he's had to have another, albeit minor, operation because he's not quite able to get himself back to the point where he's in contention. It's a huge blow for the lad, but and that isn't seeking to apportion blame in any area, but the fact that Liam Manning is openly talking about, they just need, they almost under every stone they have to look now to try and get past this point, because to bring it back to your question, Sam, you couldn't, if there was two players you wouldn't want him to be without now, while he's trying to pull the threads of this together and deliver a style and a philosophy that's a Liam Manning Norwich. I can see what they're trying to do, home or away. It would be your two shiny new summer signings in forward areas. Albeit very small samples, but I think both had shown in glimpses. Chris Gordon just comes off the back of his first league goal at Coventry. Jallo, I agree, probably within the context of these struggles in possession, I think has struggled himself in the last game or two. But we saw at Watford when he burst onto the scene in that League Cup tie. That's not Liam Manning on the phone for you, is it, Sam?
I don't think so, unless he's particularly unhappy with something one of us has said. Apologies for
that. But Chris, I'm sorry, Papa at Watford. That's the quickest I've ever seen a new player come in, and it was not even a 45 minutes to be almost adored by the fan base at Vicarage Road that night, just by his immediate impact. And you thought, what a player they've got here, and he's lost his way. He had lost his way a little bit, but as I say, I think for me it was more within the struggles that are ongoing to try and get some control of that ball across midfield areas, which wasn't aiding his cause. But there's no doubt they leave a massive hole now, because before we started to record today, I'm thinking, well, what way will he go? And I know we'll get onto this in due course, in terms of what players could step up, what players can come in, and any of the available options aren't upgrades, if we're being honest, on Chris Gordon and Jallo. So, when the season's already started in a fitful manner, to lose those two, and particularly Jallo now, it's going to be 2026, it would seem. That is huge. And I didn't ask Liam Manning in Wednesday's presser. I think I probably will follow up now in one of these next two. Do they, as they did, if you go back to this time last year, countenanced going into the free agent market and brought in Emi Marcondes, didn't they? Who may be part of the solution for this weekend, but moving forward, moving beyond this week, is that now something that Ben Napper, his recruitment types, Liam Manning, are they going to have to look at? Because it does feel. I saw a tweet earlier on today about, you look at where are the wide players in this group, and almost now people pushing for Elliot Miles, who I don't think fitness-wise is probably there yet. But if it's got to that degree, then do they need to look at, maybe having to bring in a short-term option? Because if not, the likes of Cernac, the likes of Jurasek are the only ones really like for like in those areas of the pitch. Then you're probably having to get into scenarios where Oscar Schwartau is shoved out there, or Marcondes is shoved out there, and or even heaven forbid, you're pushing a Stacey or a Fisher forward, depending on what the system is, and none of that. Jeff Schlupp, when he's fit and available, maybe he comes into that equation, but none of that is the excitement factor that is Chris Gordon and Jallow, and not only what accompanied their arrivals when they first came into the building, but what we've seen, albeit in very frustratingly short periods, but in a Norwich shirt, that you thought there's two players, given time, given a learning curve in terms of what the Championship's all about, could really, in and around a Josh Sargent, become quite a focal point for Norwich's work at the top end of the pitch. And such is the hand that's been dealt Liam Manning now. He's effectively got a plan without the two of those for, well, certainly in Papa's case, until the new year, which is, if you'd have gone into that press conference and said maybe the one player, Sargent aside, you could ill afford to do without as you're trying to find your way in terms of with the ball and forward attacking areas strategy, then I'm pretty sure Jallow would be pretty near the top of that list. So you can't slice it any other way than it's a major blow for the player, but also for Norwich and Liam Manning. Yeah,
definitely. And it gives him, I think, a lot of options, to be honest, going into this weekend. He kind of said in his press conference that he felt there was squad depth there. He didn't think that the Diallo issue came as a result of sort of overloading him and exposing him a little bit too much by having a lack of options. I think there will probably be a few Norwich fans who disagree, and I have seen a few of those. But I think going into the weekend, he has a few who could go out there. You mentioned Schwartau, Marcondes, Jovan Makama, obviously, to me, looks like an absolute archetypal central striker, but has played out wide at Lincoln and a couple of times for Norwich. Obviously, Jurasek has played on both sides for
do you want to answer that one, son? Sorry, mate, to cut across.
He was in the team photo the other day. I think he's obviously had some fitness issues of his own. But to be honest, it's been so long since we saw him, it's kind of hard to keep up at times. I think, obviously, the fact that he was included in that team photo suggests he's still part of the first team selection. But right now, I would probably put him... I mean, it doesn't feel likely to me that he plays anytime soon. But, with the injury struggles that he's had and the fact that he hasn't been anywhere near the matchday squad, I'd be very surprised if he just gets chucked in. But I mean, you might say different, because I'm going to throw it over to you in a second and kind of ask what you expect Liam Manning to do with that team, because I mean, as I said, there are a lot of options. I don't think any of them are really the best. That's kind of the problem, that Manning has a few solutions he could try, but I think either way, that left side is probably going to be a little bit of a makeshift one at Stoke. Might even end up being a bit of a weakness for the home side to exploit. Obviously, Manning will try to limit the chances of that as much as he possibly can. But given some of the players available, obviously there are still some fitness issues to deal with, some formation changes that Manning could play with based on what he's done with the team before. I guess that it would be Lucian Mahovo at left wing back on tactics board, but as you outlined on the spaces, there would be problems with that as well, given the fact that he hasn't played since February. So if you had to guess now, what Liam Manning might do with that team, who do you think we might see on the left-hand side at Stoke?
Yeah, that would be a big call on Mahovo. But as he said to us on Wednesday, there was the ideal scenario, which probably included 21's minutes and gradually building him up. And there's the scenario that they now face, which is, Schlupp isn't ready to go. It was his inference midweek. Cordoba, I think probably needs to come out of the side if it's a left-sided, left back type option you're looking for. And Kenny McLean I didn't read into that he's going to be in contention seriously if he's not trained this week and he hasn't trained last week. They'll have to probably dip to that level now in terms of the 21s. Ozcan, I think he's a left-sided player, isn't he? We had a look at him pre-season.
Left back.
He seemed to like him. I remember in the Northampton opening behind closed doors game, he actually name-checked him. He was quite impressed with him. So does he get a look in now in and around the squad? I'm not necessarily punting him for an 11. I just think because it is Stoke away and it is a Mark Robbins Stoke, he's probably going to have to err on this. If you're Liam Manning, probably think, well, we need to. I mean, there was a point I pushed through there about do you just pack the midfield and almost not go there and cling on for Coventry levels of a point. but I think he's more likely to go conservative end than maybe throw a Mahova in from the start, or be even further forward, maybe going with Cernak, Jurasek and Amar Condes. I just don't see that stacks up to how he might want to go and approach it at Stoke. So for me, I think Fisher comes probably in on the left-hand side. You retain Stacey on the right, Darling and Medic in the 4, which then probably becomes a 3 when they're in possession, and then they can push wide into those wider areas. And if there's no McLean, for me, he's got to stick with Topic and Maatsen. You don't go out and bring those 2 players in, and then you give them one outing which didn't go that well for them or collectively against Wrexham. I think you have to give them time to build those relationships, and then if that is the case, Sargent's up top and it's 3 behind. So I see Marcondes in there. I see Cernak in there, and I just think he might err on the side of either a Schwartau or a Makama, but maybe Schwartau just because we know he likes the player, but he also likes that legs, that energy, that running power. And as I say, because it's Stoke away, do you drop a Jurasek in from the start? I'm not sure. I think that would just leave him a bit open. I think out of possession, they'd look a bit vulnerable. So I can see him going that route, really, and bringing Schwartau in. I mean, he talked about Gibbs and the cameo he had against Wrexham, but if Gibbs comes in, then are you saying Topic or Maatsen have to come out? I don't see that. That doesn't really stack up to me, unless he's going to change what the centre of the middle of the park looks like structurally, and maybe goes 3 in there. That's possible. I mean, he's doing all he can in these cameos, but I just think I don't see Gibbs coming in and a Topic or Maatsen coming out. So unless he's changing it up in terms of the structure, then it's hard for me to see where Gibbs comes in from a start tomorrow. Whereas you could now see Schwartau coming in because he's one of those who, I think he's spoken himself, he sees himself more in those advanced attacking midfield areas. And that's probably where he is now going to be light with no Chris Gordon, no Jallo. Because I just think that the element of risk that is inherent in a Jurasek and a Cernak in there, you just think out of possession, what will they offer going back the other way? Whereas, with Schwartau, he'll be up and down. And he will try and play his part out of possession as much as in possession. So, and with Marcondes in there, you've got that creative link anyway to Sargent, hopefully. So, I mean, I'll bowl that one back to you, Sam. How do you see it setting up? How did you go with it on tactics board? So you seriously think he could go Mahovo from the start?
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing's perfect at the moment, right? So that's why I just felt that Liam kind of talked Mahovo's training performances up quite a lot in that, that pre-match press conference. I think when you look at, for example, how he addressed Jeffrey Schlupp and kind of his fitness, even though Schlupp's only been out for a couple of weeks or 3 weeks with kind of a minor injury, he spoke about Schlupp still needing some kind of training minutes and needing to see how he reacts to, his first few days back in training. Whereas Mahovo, it was very much, he's looked good in training, and obviously there was the ideal plan, but that's had to kind of go out of the window. And it was very firmly, although it wasn't firmly he will start or, anything like that, it did sound to me like almost as firm a commitment he could give to the fact that Mahovo is kind of properly in contention. So that's kind of why I went for him. It feels to me like there's a chance it looks more like the kind of typical Manning 3-4-3 that obviously we saw at Bristol City, that we've seen a few times at the start of the season, because I think that's just kind of more, well, first of all, you don't have to have out and out wingers, which obviously Norwich don't really have on that left-hand side now. And also it gives you more opportunity to, as you said earlier, kind of pack those bodies in and go with a slightly more conservative, approach, really, because I agree that when you're in these circumstances and you're kind of hemmed in and you've got fewer options to choose from, it feels more likely to me, especially with kind of the type of pragmatism that Manning offers, that he does go with that more reserved approach than going all out and saying, okay, fine, well, there are all these circumstances against us, so let's just go and attack against Stoke, who started the season really well, and obviously are going to be at home for that game. I don't think that's the kind of character that Manning is. So I see him maybe going for a setup that looks more like a back five. So that's kind of why I went for Mahovo. It will be interesting, actually, what he does with Liam Gibbs, because I think you've outlined there, really, in terms of his performances, it's hard to say that he hasn't earned it over some of the others who haven't really looked particularly up to the pace, haven't given as much really to the side that maybe Manning wants. And he actually spoke a lot about behaviours in his pre-match press conference, and clearly that's something that he's focused on. I think a lot of people would say maybe there needs to be more attention on tactics and team selection and the structure of the team, but he clearly feels that a big part of it against Wrexham was the willingness to run, the kind of desire, the passion that he didn't feel was there from his team, which is obviously something that Liam Gibbs gave in abundance, and you can't ever really criticise him for that. But I agree with you. I'm not sure, in terms of the tactical and technical elements he brings, I'm not sure Manning ever goes for him over Topic or Maatsen in that central midfield. I know we had comments kind of outlining that he's played out wide, but for me, that's I mean, the Coventry game was the perfect example. He got brought on with, I think, about 20 minutes left, came on the left wing and does all that running for you, and will certainly do the defensive side of it. But then I remember one occasion he got the ball out wide. He had loads of space to run into, but he basically just stopped himself dead and just slung a ball in the box, because I think he knew as much as anyone else that he's not that traditional winger who can kind of take players on and create danger in that sense. Whereas I think the likes of Schwartau and Marcondes, maybe, as you referenced, give you, although they're not perfect, certainly they're not wingers by trade, they give you a little bit more at both sides. I think they give you a bit more in an attacking sense than Gibbs, maybe a little bit less defensively than Gibbs would, but still enough, and probably more than you get from a sort of Jurasek if Manning does want to go with a slightly more pragmatic style, which I'd suggest he probably will. And it'll be interesting to see what team he picks. I think apart from the opening day, it's going to be the most unpredictable starting lineup that we've probably seen so far of Manning's tenure. So all these injuries, the poor form, some of his players who maybe do need resting, I think it's a big test of his kind of tactical nous and the way that he manages his team sort of game to game in terms of what he does with that team and how it pans out. But I wanted to ask you specifically about one of the players who probably a lot of people would say deserves to be dropped by now based on some of his performances. Ante Sienats, no assists, no goals. And you actually asked Liam about him at the press conference. So I'm going to just play that clip first to see what Liam's made of his start to the season, and then we can discuss Ante Sienats and maybe where things go from here with him.
Because he was quite candid, he did a bit with Sam over the international break and said, look, he needs to be better. He knows he needs to deliver a bit more. And would you concur with that? You know, that it's not meant to focus solely on him because it's obviously collective, but there's a player who came in, had a first season in England, showed a lot of promise in terms of his numbers were good for his age as well, and hasn't really happened for him the start of this season.
Not quite yet, but I'm confident it will in terms of the qualities I know he's got. And again, I think naturally when a young player like that who solid first season is it's not always easy to go and replicate that the second season because people are more aware of you, know your strengths, know your game a little bit. But it's one of those. The only way you change that, and that's the bit I spoke about after the weekend. What's your default when you're having that? That because every player in whatever level will have moments in their career where they have a couple of poor games or games where they're not at the level they want to be. The only way you get through that, and not just in football, in life in general, is by getting your head down and working and backing yourself and pushing through it. And that's what we have to develop and build. And they're the bits in terms of the trust, the relationships that you form over time. When we have a tough period at the weekend, how do we respond? What we have to do going forward, collectively and individually, is look internally and pull each other through it. And that's the biggest bit.
Didn't turn my mic back on there. What did you make of that response, Paddy, when he gave it to you on Wednesday, and what have you made of seeing that's his starts to the season so far?
Probably the same view as most observers, really, fans. More importantly, that he hasn't. We can see the sort of tone of some of the comments coming through as well. You know, that there's a player who he simply hasn't kicked on from. You know, internally, you spoke to people over the summer, and they felt this is a big season now for Anthony Cernak. He almost had that body of work. He had that full season in England to do that adaptation period that a lot of the ones who've come in this summer are now maybe experiencing, certainly the overseas players. So there can't have been any surprises going into this season. You knew what the Championship was all about, the demands. I recall Ben Napper saying to us that they'd actually seen a change maybe in his personality, that he was now comfortable in that environment. He's obviously quite maybe an introverted lad by nature, and such a young man and far away from his family and his friends and his football support network and everything he's known. That is going to be quite a challenge for him in that initial maybe year or so in England. But that they'd seen him step forward. I remember Liam Manning telling me that in the dressing room, in terms of the dynamics, he's one of those who's very comfortable with being in and around the younger lads, but also the more experienced players, and a real good presence, very popular in the dressing room. And you thought, well, okay, everything's set fair. In my question there, that did surprise me when I was told that in the summer. But if you look at, I think it was 21 and under attacking players, maybe having their first season in that division. He was, I don't think it was even the first season. I just think 21 and under attacking players. I think he was like second or third on the list in terms of goal contributions, goals and assists. Yeah. And I was surprised about that, but that tells you that he did have, albeit it was a bit fitful, but there was times last season, we can all recall those games where he looked like a player. Whether he looked like an £8.5 million player is another matter entirely, and I think we'd all probably agree that he wasn't. But again, absolutely nothing to do with him. That was Norwich, and that was his Polish club, and that was the deal that got put in place. I think if they had their time over again, the people who matter at Norwich now would maybe consider that was paying over the odds for that player, irrespective of what he has or hasn't done in a Norwich shirt. But you can't rewrite history. That is what it is. But that brings with it the expectancy that he will step up off the back of an encouraging, didn't set anything alight really, but an encouraging first season in England. And yeah, it's for Liam Manning now to try and work out what is it. Is it what he's been asked to do? He's been moved around. He was in that central 10 role, wasn't he, in the first few games? He didn't look comfortable there. He got shifted back out more to the right-hand side, which in that interview he did with you over that international break, he seemed to indicate that's where he felt he wanted to play and where he was best suited. Because of circumstances, he's back in more of a central area last weekend. And again, for me, largely anonymous, and he's on the periphery and he's not influencing anything at all. It's a real problem. It's a real worry because now he does need to step up in a post sort of Chris Gordon, post Jallow time frame. You're looking to Cernak to be that almost chief support to Josh Sargent, and it's simply not happening. And if you want an omen, I think Stoke was away last season, was the first time he scored in a Norwich shirt. He slotted at the back post, a lovely half volley, and that maybe gave him that shot of confidence. And it just feels like it needs something like that again now. He needs to move centre stage and have a positive impact, and that might then unlock something, because at the moment there's no doubt he looks kind of, again, he's gone back into his shell almost, and he just looks like a player who's on the margins and letting things drift and passing by. And implicit in what Liam Manning was saying midweek is that not just with him but with all of these players, no, they need to grab it, they need to step forward and almost, I'm going to be the one who drags this through now into where it is now, to what it could hopefully look in the future. And I think he's lucky. I think he's very lucky. I think, but for these two attacking injuries, he comes out of the side for me, because it had reached that point, I think, where, and it's not pile on Anthony Cernak. It's maybe take him out the side. He can take a bit of a breather, reflect, look at what's not working, maybe go and work on a few things, and then maybe you can drop him in, as we've talked about Gibbs and Schwarto. It's a lot easier, maybe. Certainly when you're in games and Norwich are in these games, that you can influence and exert a greater impact, maybe rather than starting games and you feel that it's not really happened for you today. And that's for me where we're at with him, that something needs to change, because if it doesn't, and certainly when Chris Gordon, when Jallow are back in the mix, if he hasn't improved in terms of his actual baseline numbers, goals and assists, then he doesn't really deserve to retain his place. And that is going to ask or lead to far more questions in terms of the initial piece of recruitment than the answers that have been provided thus far.
Yeah, definitely. And he's another element I think that will be interesting in terms of how Manning handles it. As you said, probably the attacking injuries have helped him a lot in terms of staying in the team. But you kind of later in the press conference asked Manning about team selection and how that works in terms of keeping players almost motivated, but how he weighs up that man management side of things. And he spoke about the fact that sometimes you need to play players through bad periods to almost, force the logjam of bad performances out and show them that trust. And that's clearly the approach that he's taken with Seaman so far. Somebody he clearly rates very highly in terms of his talent and ability and what he could do. But he also discussed the fact that sometimes you need to kind of set standards by dropping players, by showing them that things aren't good enough, by almost giving them that wake up call. And obviously we've seen that at times with players as well. So it'll be interesting to see if and when that moment comes with Sinat, when he says, okay, enough's enough. He needs to be shown with actions that, it's not good enough and that he won't continue to be in this starting 11 if he keeps playing that way. But yeah, as we've referenced with the injuries and the situation in the attack, it feels like right now there aren't too many options. So it might be that Sinat manages to cling on to that place at the moment. But certainly Norwich do need a little bit more from him. And I think when you look at this weekend, this is the sort of game where you probably should be able to rely on someone like him. He's 6 foot plus. He's got quite a significant build. He looks like he could be a real physical player, and we've seen signs of that in a Norwich shirt at times before. But I don't think it's been consistent enough. He looks too off the pace. He looks like he doesn't have that focus a lot of the time, and like he's not really particularly switched on. So for me, that would be what I would be trying to get him working on as well if I was Liam Manning. But if we look at Stoke, going into tomorrow's game, you spoke a little bit earlier about Mark Robins, the job that he's done. Obviously, they're second in the Championship at the moment. They've actually lost 2 of their last 3. But when you look at their start as a whole and the way that Robins has them playing, it will be a really tough game away from home, won't it, Paddy?
Yeah, I must confess, I haven't looked too closely at their actual sort of results, but you look at that albeit early table, and Middlesbrough are the ones who are leading the way, aren't they? But the fact that Stoke are just tucked in behind, from as I say, from what was a full-on bona fide relegation scrap last season, it's quite a turnaround so far, and it maybe just underlines that, as Liam referenced when he was asked about Mark Robins, he's very, you can see this from an outside observer point of view. He's very calm, he's very level. I'm sure as tense and difficult as that first few months would have been at Stoke, he's used that to almost give him the foundation to clearly go away. They've had a decent summer transfer window to add to that group, and now they're one of those clubs. I mean, you just hope that their longevity in this division isn't where we are with Norwich now, because they are one of those. As we all know, we know the story of Stoke, the Tony Pulis era. They were your archetypal Premier League staple for a long period of time. Got themselves into Europe as well through sort of cup competitions, and have lost their way like a lot of clubs. And obviously with them, they've had 1 or 2 skirmishes, but have managed to at least stay in the second level. And now, I mean, you go there and we know the backing that they've got in terms of the Coates family. I mean, everything, it does seem to be geared up infrastructure-wise for that club to be punching much better than they have done in these last 6, 7, 8 seasons. And probably it underlines the dangers of where Norwich are, where they find themselves, at the moment, that it can go that route. It can go into wilderness years, basically, if you don't make the right decisions from top to bottom of the club. And under Robins, I think they'll be far more competitive. Time will tell whether they've got enough to sustain, where they are at the moment, whether they'll fall away a little bit. But, you would imagine if he's given the period of time he had, certainly at Coventry, then he will get them into genuine top 6 contenders, because that's a scale of club which should be competing at the top end of the pitch. Top end of the Championship, as Norwich should be. So it's a really interesting one tomorrow, and I've got to be honest, I'm fearing that it probably won't go in Norwich's favour tomorrow, just because I think they've lent so heavily on that away form, and you know what will happen at some point. That isn't going to be reliant if they don't get it going at home. So I can see them falling a little bit short tomorrow, just because Stoke are on this run, and under Robbins, they probably are feeling that they're on a bit of an upward curve. Whereas with Norwich, it's just, as I say, as we said earlier, it feels like they're treading water a little bit, still on this voyage of discovery. And as such, I think, while you hope it's a far better performance, I think it's quite a tough ask to go there and expect them to go and get a positive result tomorrow. But if they could do that, it does set them up for quite a big week now within the context of the early part of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you've hinted there at the tone of what it might be. I was going to come to you for your score prediction next. I'll waffle a little bit and tell people what I think of the game tomorrow. So you can come up with yours. But I think I kind of agree. I think it's tough for a lot of reasons. I think probably, although the atmosphere won't be good if they do lose this game, I think when you look at the trajectory and the momentum, it's hard to say that fans will just accept it if they lose tomorrow based on injuries and things like that. They clearly want to see more, and I think that's justified when you look at how much has been spent on players, the promises made going into the season, and the fact that the performances haven't quite been there. But personally, I feel like, to be honest, if they did lose tomorrow against a side that have done really well so far this season, it would almost be easiest to forgive him of all of the performances that there have been so far this season. But that doesn't really count for anything. Whether it can be justified and whether Manning's in a tough spot. Ultimately, what counts for them in the pursuit of Championship promotion is putting points on the board. So perhaps this is the type of scenario where you've got a coach known for pragmatism and flexibility and tactical nous, and being able to do things game by game if they're not quite working on a long-term basis. So maybe this is the sort of game where Norwich should be hoping to profit from having a head coach like Liam Manning, rather than one of the more ideological types like Johannes Torup. So I'm sure Manning will back himself to kind of force something out of the game for his side. But I feel like with the quality that Stoke have shown so far this season, and the struggles that Norwich are obviously having in terms of momentum and injuries, I feel like it might be a slender 2-1 loss for Norwich. So that's my prediction. What about yours, Paddy?
Yeah, I was going 2-1 as well, Sam. Yeah. So moving on, I don't know if Craig is either bored of me and you or actually has somewhere to be. So he needs to know how long we're going to be before we wrap it up. Not long now, Sam. Am I right saying?
No, you're right. I think
So
a few minutes. Definitely now that we've stunk the place out with our negative predictions, there's probably not loads of us.
Let me just bowl you one though here from Isabel, because I have to be brutally honest. When we were earlier on in the record talking about what the 1 to 11 might look like, maybe it's because he's been banned for 3 games, but I must confess I had almost forgotten young Jacob Wright in terms of that central mid. We talked about Gibbs and could he dislodge a Mats and Topic. Where's your head at with Jacob Wright? Because he does, in this quest for being better on the ball, that is one thing he will bring because of his natural sort of technical ability. So is that a shout for Stoke, do you think?
I think possibly, but for me, even though he is slightly better on the ball than some of the midfielders they've got, I don't think he's the type of midfielder they need. I think although Matson and Topic maybe aren't known for flair and creativity, I think they're decent enough to pass the ball sideways and to keep the tempo moving and just play those passes around midfield. I think what Norwich have really lacked is and apologies for saying it, but a Marcelino Nunez type who obviously could be the link between the midfield and the attack and could kind of start attacks in that sense. I think although Wright is probably better at tempo setting and playing those passes that kind of get Norwich going, and probably he would help with the control element that we spoke about. Actually, I'm still not sure he solves any of the problems that kind of Maatsen and Topic fail to in midfield, really, I think maybe it's worth giving him a go, because ultimately you saw that performance against Wrexham. Wright certainly isn't going to make it any worse than that. And maybe you could even throw Liam Gibbs into that conversation. But I just think while particularly Maatsen is still getting used to the Championship, Manning is probably trying to get Topic and Maatsen used to playing together. I think you look at the long-term plan, Kenny McLean obviously out of contract next summer and his age. Clearly for me, the plan is for Maatsen and Topic, maybe Wright in the future as well, but for the next couple of years, probably to be the Max Bird and Jason Knight equivalent to what Manning had at Bristol City. So I think, given Wright doesn't completely solve any of your problems for me, it may well be worth just kind of keeping that duo in there, bearing in mind they've only played 60, 70 minutes together, and trying to kind of help them play together and help develop that relationship, because ultimately I think we've seen they look like a team that look pretty disjointed at the moment, and they need to, for me, play more minutes together, particularly those summer signings like Maatsen and Topic. So that's why I maybe wouldn't have Jacob Wright in there. But certainly, if it goes on like it did against Wrexham any longer, then him and Liam Gibbs, I think, have both got a shout in that midfield mix. But would you throw him in, Paddy, for this weekend?
No, I'd agree with everything you said there, Sam. I mean, it's worth reiterating that obviously it was pre-Maatsen's arrival, but Jacob Wright was starting the first few games of the season, so he'd obviously impressed Liam Manning enough. Even if you wouldn't, as you rightly say, draw a parallel with his two he had at Bristol in the middle of the park, you wouldn't say he's a like for like or in the same bracket as those two midfield profiles. But he obviously saw in Wright somebody he thought could be an asset with the right players around him, and that's where I am with Wright. I think he would need to have the right support around him to no pun intended, but to offset maybe the defensive elements of his game, which I don't think come naturally. He certainly needs to work on his tackling a little bit, given that Middlesbrough red card. But that was more over enthusiastic in terms of trying to recover his heavy initial touch. But I think for me, if he was coming into the Norwich midfield at the moment, it'd probably need a structural change in terms of the amount of bodies you had in there, and you would also need the players to offer that defensive protection for the back four. And I just don't see that level of disruption, given that he's now having to sort of unpick where he is at the top end of the pitch through injuries. I don't see him necessarily trying to do that to accommodate Wright in the very, very short term. But as you rightly say, if they can't get hold of the ball any better than they did against Wrexham, then it will become quite a compelling case to get him in, because that is one thing he will do. He will get on the ball. He will try and set the tempo. He will, as he did against Middlesbrough actually in the first half alongside Topic. That was one of the probably the better spells from a very small sample at Carrow Road, where Norwich had some control of the ball. They were pushing back Middlesbrough towards the Barclay in that first half, and that was a Wright and a Topic axis. So yeah, there's definitely a case of when he comes back in, but for me, no, not this weekend. I don't think, just because, again, for all the reasons we've already stated, it's a very, very difficult outpost they're going to this weekend.
Definitely, and that's probably a good way to end it. I'll just finish by showing some predictions. We'll start with some more negativity, perhaps justified. By the way, I'm not leveling that as a criticism. Isabel thinks it'll be 3-0 to Stoke, which is going even further than we thought. And maybe you can see the reasons for that, but hopefully Norwich can produce something a little bit better. To finish it with, I'll show Steve's prediction. He thinks a narrow 2-1 win for Norwich, and let's hope he proves all of us wrong in terms of tomorrow, and Norwich can eke out another victory, which probably will be difficult given the opposition and some of the circumstances. But you look at their away record so far, and you wouldn't completely rule it out. So let's see. Of course, Pinken.com, the place to go for more coverage. Pinken.com/subscribe if you haven't already, and you'll have access to all of that. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for joining me, Paddy. And we'll see you at the, what's it called now? Stoke Stadium, Bet365 Stadium. Well, is it? I think it is.
Well,
let's go that.
It has been for however many years. I thought you were going to throw me a curveball down, so it's been renamed or something.
No. Well, I'm wary of this with Championship stadiums. Whenever they've got a sponsored name, I never really know. So we'll see you at the Bet365 Stadium when we'll have all of your coverage from tomorrow's game. See you then.